Can start. Welcome, everyone. Thank you for all the panelists, the speakers, the moderators, the curators for being here, for joining us for this uh, Center for Design conversation is actually part of the fall series. We started doing this conversation in spring this year with the aim of creating new connections, new bridges, as we call them, between design and other disciplines. And we crossed very different topics like data physicalization in the first, and the future of games, game design for health, how design may impact misinformation. And then we moved into slightly more conceptual and political even topics like what is the role in design in this idea of the pluriverse. And then we started a full series talking about design tools and methods and how we should maybe reflect on our discipline and change the way we do our work for tackling societal challenges. And now we are dealing with yet another bridge between design, sound, music, and this is also an attempt to create a stronger connection between the design department and the Center for Design and the music department in the College of Art, Media and Design at Northeastern is one of the many potential connections that we can create internally. But before that, we want to also discuss this potential bridge with other guests and external professionals and academic people that are dealing more with the same, working in the same field. I'm Paolo Ciuccarelli. I'm the founding director of the Center for Design. I'm really pleased to leave the stage to the curators and the moderators of this series of this last, actually it's not the last, we will have another conversation in December the 3rd about design and architecture. So Sarah Lenzi, the floor is yours to introduce this conversation about music, sound, and design.
Thank you, Paolo. Thank you to our guests, and thank you to all those who joined today's conversation. And I also wanted to thank the Center for Design, which I very recently joined, to host a conversation on a topic that is perhaps a bit unusual for our audience. And in fact, you might wonder what a sonic experience is at all. Of course, it's the goal of today to discuss it and converse on this topic together with our guests. But as an opening thought, which is an absolutely personal thought, to me, a sonic experience happens every time we experience the world around us, not only through what we see, but also through what we hear. And in doing so, through sound, we gather information on the context in which we are and on the role that we are having in that context, but we also emotionally connect to it, be it in a positive or in a negative way. So one of the goals of today is to eviscerate, together with the audience and our guests, how do we actually actively design this relationship with the world through sound? And we think it is relevant today in a moment in which designers, traditional designers, if you allow me to say so, are often challenged with creating more and more integrated and complex experiences for a more and more integrated and complex world. So we do believe, I do strongly believe, that sound can be a great asset in creating these experiences that are more engaging, more fulfilling, more effective and efficient. And we would like to provide designers with new tools and new methods to use sound for better experiences. And then about the other side of the equation, musical thinking, it's in the title. I'll ask Deirdre to comment briefly on it, and I will thank her also for being co-moderating with me today.
Yes, well, thank you, Sarah and Paolo, for inviting me to participate in this design space. I'm Deirdre Lockridge, music historian in the music department. And so I wanted to reflect here that music has had many definitions, from sounding number, reflecting a rational order of the cosmos, to the art of combining sounds to please the ear, to the language of emotion, to, in a classic 20th century formulation, humanly organized sound. And each definition highlights something about what sound can do while missing others, and a sense that music as a category and a discipline is missing significant dimensions of sonic experience has informed recent turns to sound art and sound studies. Rather than moving us toward broadened and multiplied perspectives on sonic experience, however, it often seems like we've been moving towards greater divisions, where music is one thing and sound is everything else. And so I'm hopeful that today's conversation, that we'll be able to hear more about what these domains have in common, hear more of what they have in common, and how each offers skills, expertise, concerns, and questions that are mutually interesting and beneficial. I'll turn it back to Sarah.
Yeah, thank you. It's already time to introduce our speakers, our guests today. We have three guest speakers: Maëlys, who is founder of Biophilica. She's a sonic artist, an immersive ecology designer, and clean energy ambassador. And thank you very much for being here. We have then Nicolas Misdaris, who is a research director and head of the Sound Perception and Design Group at IRCAM in Paris, and Alexander Vodry, who is CEO and founder of the sound branding and service design agency Why Do Birds, based in Berlin. So thank you very much to all of you for being here. And before leaving the stage to Maëlys, a quick note for our audience: we pasted a Google form. It's a very simple poll. Basically, we would like to ask you live, so we can perhaps fine-tune the conversation today, which background you come from, because as we said, this is an interdisciplinary conversation. So are you from the sound and music world, or are you from the design world? That would help us to better run the flow today, perhaps. So I invite you to complete the form. And Maëlys, welcome to the conversation.
Sorry, my mouse disappeared. Really helpful. Let me share my screen so I can show you my presentation. Okay, desktop. It's not quite right. Hang on a second. Let me just check something bizarre just happened with my thing. Okay, here we go. And now share this. There we go. Play. Okay, can you all see a picture of our lovely Earth from where we come and I come? As you guys said, my name is Maëlys. I was born in 1978, so I'm in a weird generation between Generation X and Millennials, where we still had analog telephones, which I actually think has a lot to do with what I've ended up doing in my life. Most of everything I do is because of the critical situation we find ourselves in. These slides are years old, so the numbers on here are worse, which is not a good trajectory, and certainly you know, a lot of what drives me to continue doing the work that I do, regardless of some of the difficulties. Notably, the entry point for me over the last few decades, 2 decades and a half, I've been doing this work is the particularities about plants that we haven't been paying attention to. We're doing a better job of it now, but certainly when I started, this wasn't the case. So they have all sorts of really interesting characteristics and forms of intelligence that aren't very human or fit in with our typical ideas of what intelligence is, and yet we are indeed their offspring. They are the ones that have transformed the earth into a living being, which survives and produces all the necessary requirements for us to survive. So a lot of that interest was honed by a book that I read and a very weird video I watched when I was much younger, called The Secret Life of Plants. I highly recommend that everybody reads it and watches the film. It was very bizarre. So I decided that I wanted to kind of take on what I'd learned in that book, notably some of the work done by John Lifton, which was called Green Music, and take the bioelectrical signals of plants and turn them into sound. Now, at that age, which I was in this picture, you can see that the technology available was a little bit crude. And I was certainly not about to be given money to go and do something like that. So I spent my time developing other things, learning how to code, which I did from when I was 19, just to be able to start designing music from scratch. And I wrote an album called Formations, which is the only one I've ever written. And it was strangely recorded algorithms, which I found to be really ridiculous, and I thought we should really be streaming music. But anyway, I recorded that, and I went on to then produce interactive music using sensors, which, yeah, at the time was really not so easy to do. In fact, Earcam was very helpful because you guys supported people making interfaces for control voltages to MIDI, which was very important. So I would take these sort of electronics and mesh them with, devastation forests, and make things like these gestural sculptures here, which had a light sensor in it. So you'd lift that little piece of resin off, and all the music and the code would start playing. And I'd be able to manipulate it through gestures with, like, pressure sensors inside of flutes and stuff like that, and gloves and whatever that I made. And I built these into interactive installations so people could actually use these gestural interfaces to produce pop music with code, which is what I called it, generative pop music. And then, because I was relatively successful at that, they gave me some money finally to work with this guy who essentially was I think we could all collectively call a gnome, clearly. He's no longer with us, but he is the person I worked with to develop these very strange devices that were the first plant-human interfaces that I got involved in making. So then finally I got to attach plants in my bedroom to the code and make some sort of biogenerative music. At least we're working with using electrodes to pick up types of bioelectrical energies that have a lot of influence through EMFs and horrible things like that. So it's a very tricky job. And to present it, I developed an installation because, it deserved to have an entire presentation around it. I was working always in multi-channel sound. My record was multi-channel sound, even though it ended up being recorded onto stereo because that's required, strangely still. And these, I won't play this because it would be too long, but essentially I had these boxes and hid them behind what was on the inside, which was basically the star-studded environment that you'd be able to go around and move around and touch plants, and all this music would come out. And you had your feet in the soil, and it smelt good, and the lighting reminded us of what it was like before we polluted the earth to where we can't see the stars, even though it's totally fake. And then, of course, glitter, one of the most horrendous ecological products, which I don't use anymore, but at the time it was really fun. And just generally building these environments to present the work, which behind the scenes I was advancing. This is the first GUI to be able to control some of that data more easily. It was tricky to do on site. And then just branching out and doing this in different things. So this is like a vertical garden and such, whilst I developed the hardware, which eventually became a lot smaller. Still doing that. and then generally just presenting it all over the place at every opportunity. So in museums, through some of the mixed in with some of those other interfaces, which I typically use to trigger the sounds of nature, which I record from all over the place, and at non-profits and galleries, and in festivals and in schools, and building stages to present the music and play it in a setting that I think is more conducive to kind of exploring what it is, and performing it in various places, which I really find very awkward, but they typically gather a lot more viewers than installations for some reason. But sometimes being able to combine installations with performances, such as here. One of my favorite things I ever did was a book called Organocastro, which was the plants were triggering as they generated the super collider code, the music. It also generated their score, which was designed to match whatever that code was generating, so that we had a live plant conducted orchestra, which was quite rad. So that's me playing the orchestra, and then just branching out into other things and into light, using light as well, because not everybody is that into sound. And also just generally, trying to get these important facets of nature, which are vital to our collective, health, societal health, into our daily lives, not just on these events or specific exhibitions, but as a matter of being part of our schools, for example. So this one is actually in a school. And then moving into domes as well to do that, because you don't have any corners. So when you want to make an environment, you can really build something that has a real sense of a space. So that's a permanent installation I did. That one has a lot of embedded sensors in it, which generate sound when kids are still. So each of those little pockets represent a different part of the rainforest. And there's, as you can see, a live stream in there. So it's what I call a hybrid environment of like living ecology plus some technologically augmented stuff, which we built with the kids. And then they get to go sit in there. When they're still, stuff happens. So it's kind of the opposite of a playground, encouraging soft fascination and non-directed play and stuff like that, which is vital for growing healthy brains. But also, popping these up in festivals, these domes, because they're quite conducive to, as I said, building these immersive environments really quickly. This one was in the top of a mountain in Bhutan. So if you can do them permanently at a school in LA and the top of a mountain in Bhutan, domes are your friend. But not everybody can come to these things. So I've put them in buses and driven them to places that don't have access to nature really, that are desperate for it. So these are all interactive installations. The latest one was a caravan, which had a lot of other stuff. So we had like lots of lights and interactive fans and misters, and so this does music and other sort of elementals as well, which is great because it gives people and kids a moment to just pop into this place and have these experiences which they find quite calming and restorative. So sort of trying to bring wellness into people's lives in the city. And then moving into like more bizarre projects such as iOracle, which is based on the I Ching and using the plant to basically help machines learn how to integrate nature and natural processes, natural philosophies of ethical guidance systems, which is essentially what the I Ching is, into machine learning, and providing humans with some you know, some interesting feedback as that process unfolds. That was the prototype, and this is the most recent version of it, which I just did during the lockdown, which was a very difficult experience working on such a project in COVID. But so moving into using electrodes and again other types of atmospherics. This is a mister. But then all the while using some of that plant music, and I mean what I call plant music, it's a very loose term for, it's, you know, and doing other projects with what I call linear compositions, such as this VR piece for Ocean of Air and Tree Hugger, which is some other projects that other people have asked me to collaborate sonically on, that explore the themes of nature. So basically, you know, whether it's in the digital domain or really very physical, it's about bringing nature into people's lives and using technology as a way to enhance and augment our connection to ecology. Obviously, sound is vital to that, because we have a very particular relationship to sound, especially when it comes to plants, who have a temporal relationship that mechanical sound waves can connect to, unlike, you know, unlike light and movement. So I didn't really add any more slides from there because that was a lot. So I didn't go into any of the renewable energy stuff, but of course, if you have any questions, I'd be happy to answer or ask you back, maybe. Thanks.
Yeah, thank you, Maëlys. That was really an amazing work, amazing visuals. In fact, it strikes to me, but I will give the word to Alexander right away, because I want to leave as much time as we can to the questions. But you really, from the very beginning, design fully embodied, fully rounded experiences. So it's really something that could appeal to our audience today. Definitely does to me. But please, Alexander, you can start with your presentation.
Yes, thank you very much. And yes, also very, very impressive work and from Maëlys, amazing stuff. And what we do, I'm from the agency Why Do Birds in Berlin, and we do, it's, I guess, a bit further away from anything having to do with art in the classical sense, or with experimenting and seeing how atmospheres can evolve, because we work for brands, and so we have clear clients, and they have I don't know, sometimes they have a very clear idea of what they're looking for, and this may also be a little closer to the marketing side. So what we do is audio branding. That means we're trying to communicate brands with sound. And sometimes clients don't even know that when they come to us and they approach us, they're thinking of, they can get a cool jingle from us, something memorable, and everybody will hum and sing along to. And we always say, no, if you're serious about using audio for your brand, then you should give it a little more thought, should be more conceptual, should be holistic, shouldn't just be a 2-second jingle, should be something that you can experience all through all customer touch points that you may have with your brand. So that's what we're working on. And I have, since we don't have a lot of time, I brought one short example of a project that we actually just finished a few weeks ago. It was just launched, and it's, I can share my screen for that as well with you. That is a client from Switzerland, and they're called Swiss Re. They're a reinsurance company. That means they take care of all the big catastrophes in the world. I don't know what you may have, if they probably do the earthquakes, and then if a volcano erupts, or the collapsing bridges and stuff. That's what they're where they come in. So they're a little bit about reinsuring other companies again. And they approached us and said, yes, we are doing a rebranding in a visual identity. And please, could you help us out also to find an audio equivalent for that? So what we start with, usually it's it's an audit. We look at what the brand sounds like today already. What do other brands sound like that are the competitors to them? And we do conduct workshops with the client. And to make a long story short, there's a lot of brand values we look at, and we try to find equivalents for that. But there's also always a brief what comes out of the a workshop with the client, and they wanted quite a bit actually. They said, okay, the music, the future sound of Swiss Re should build towards something, drive towards a conclusion. It's always needs to have a climax. It should not be too simple. A certain complexity is important in the sound. Well, because what they're dealing with, they're a very, very complex product. And they're always thinking about risks. Risks is their business. And so it's actually a very technical company as far as that is concerned. The music should have several layers within it because their business is also very much layered into different subjects. But next to the technical traits, human traits are also important for them because they say what we're doing is it's people's business as well, because we're helping people in this world and we want to be close to them. So it's everything. They want everything. They want to be technical. They want to be human. They be surprising, be a little bit dramatic, but also not be too dramatic, a little bit dramatic. So that's what you're always confronted with. So you need to narrow this down in a creative process that we do. And there's a few things that we picked up on when we looked at the brand personality. And then when we start working, there's always two sides to the story. We can always work on a composition. That's where we find, I don't know, sequences of notes, obviously, and principles that help us convey an idea of a brand. On the other hand, there's the instrumentation, that is the tonality of a brand. Because you can always say, okay, well, are we more like the rock and roll brand, or are we more jazz, or very soft, easy listening? So what's the right feeling for it? But the composition is, on the other hand, is able to tell a story. And due to the short time that we have, I will leave out the instrumentation bit today and just talk to you a little bit about how we came up with a composition for the Swiss Re brand. Two things that we had in mind that we wanted to convey. The brand vision was we make the world more resilient. This is what the Swiss Re brand says. That means, how do we understand resilience in this way? It's we try to convey that into sound. And resilience for us was the quality of maintaining or returning to a stable state, because we all know the world is changing, it's a complex place, and with all the climate change and catastrophes that we have and storms and everything, we always need to come back to a stable state, and that's what Swiss Re is working for. So resilience is indeed a very wise word for them to choose. But how do we express resilience in sound? When we sat down with the composers, we started with a very, very simple idea and said, okay, resilience, maybe that's just a continuous, regular sequence of maybe one note. Listen to this. So I hope you could hear that well. That was just one note repeating. Very continuous, maybe very resilient in that sense, always very stable, and but maybe not very exciting yet. So maybe have a listen to it again, because we said it's important to have like in maybe all the music that we have, to have this reliable pulse running through music that keeps it very stable and gives it this very ongoing, reliable pulse atmosphere. So, but doesn't always have to stay identical with this one note that I played. We can also use a sound sequence like this and have the sounds or the notes evolve in depth and size. So here's this little sound snippet for that. So that was all one note. maybe that was a little more exciting already. It sounded a little bit more like music, but still not very, I don't know, not very diverse yet and not very exciting in that sense. So we said, well, resilience also means that since the world is changing, you know, the sounds can break out and go anywhere actually, but as long as they always come back to that stable condition, to that one note. So this is the one note principle, and I have one more sound example of how that can evolve. So this was already actually quite fun and exciting for us in the studio to work on this, and you know, just to see where we can go, but always have this reliable one note, stable sound going through. The second thing that we have in the sound is the partnership idea, because that's a very important thing also in the brand personality, the brand values, that we're all about partnership with our clients. And how do we express partnership here? The idea was actually to bring two voices together and always have them in parallel, sort of like working together. And the partnership is always going hand in hand. And this is what we did with the melody. So the idea here was that you never have a single voice playing. It's always two notes combined and going hand in hand with each other. And these voices, you know, they wind upwards together, parallel in motion, they support each other. And I can play it once again. And this sort of like turned into a leitmotif also for the music that we created for the brand. The very good thing about this motif was that it works in minor as well as in major. Now, for those who know a little bit about music, you know, minor is always a more dramatic and or maybe sad context. And this melody works with that. It sounds like this if you play it in a minor key. But it can also be more positive if you play it in the major key. It will be the same notes, just the chords below the background is the major one. So what we did then, we sort of like put it together. We used that resilience one note principle and added with a partnership attitude. And then obviously you had to create or wanted to create music, different pieces. Here's a little mood that we came up with, and we added it to a 1-minute video, so you can have a little glimpse of what that feels like together. Resilience and partnership for Swiss Re. So yes, maybe you could recognize on the one hand this like resilient one note principle going through the music piece, and then also the melody with the two voices. And that's actually the sound logo, which you may have noticed at the end of the video already. brings those two principles together. So we have the one note principle and accompanied by the partnership leitmotif. It sounds like this in the sound logo. Or in an animated style. Yes, so I think I took up enough of the time already. So that was just a very quick insight on how we can be creative in creating, something for a specific brief from a client, what he needs and how we approach these tasks. Thank you.
Sorry, I didn't unmute. Wow, Alexander, thank you. And I can see from the audience's comments that your work really resonated. Yeah, awesome to see how, thank you for deconstructing your design process and sharing it with us, which is really the value of what you do in a different perspective from Maëlys. So ready for another different perspective with Nicolas. And thank you again. I'm very sorry I have to go. I feel bad in having to go so fast. This is very nice. Thank you. But please, Nicolas.
Yeah, thank you, Sarah, and hello to everyone. I'm going to share my screen, sharing the audio also. Can you see my slide, and can you hear me well?
Yes, we do.
Okay. So I'm Nicolas Misdaris. In fact, I've been working at IRCAM for more than 20 years now. IRCAM is an institute, a French institute, where art and science is trying to meet together within the contemporary music and sound domain. IRCAM stands on mainly 3 feet: creation, research, and transmission. I'm gonna skip. Okay. If we look at the research pole of IRCAM, it is implemented in a research lab named STMS. STMS standing for Science and Technologies for Music and Sound. And this lab gathers 7 research groups dealing either with musicology, computer science, sound processing, acoustics, of course. And among these groups, here is the group where I work and which I coordinate at that time, the sound perception and design. So if we look more precisely in this group, within this sound perception and design group, we try to articulate basic research in sound perception and cognition, and basic research and applications in sound design. And if we dig again in this track, in this latter axis, this research in sound design is mainly rested on scientific knowledge, a strong collaboration between scientific knowledge and artistic know-how. I will develop that a little bit later, and is also fed on various industrial research collaborations. I'm going to develop that also in an example. Thinking about research in sound design, and the way we think about that is first trying to give a definition of the domain of the sound design itself. So it's not an easy task, because we all know that sound design and design, of course, is very difficult to define. But there are a lot of instances of definition in the scientific literature. But the one I found very interesting was the one given by Louis Dondrel, a very famous pioneer in sound design in France during the 90s and the beginning of the 21st century. He was briefly said that you can't consider sound design without considering design itself. And in other words, that making sound design is making design with sound. So we started, and I started in my reflection about research in sound design for 3 or 5 years later. We started to think of this sort of equation and to think about the relationships that could exist between this broad domain that is design and this subdomain or this other domain that is sound design. Interaction that could be very inclusive, meaning that sound design can inherit of a lot of concepts, practices, etc. of design, but interaction that could also be more singular and particular, saying that sound design could potentially feed the design practices, the design concept, etc. So that's a little bit the framework where we started to work. And considering that sound design can inherit a lot of things of design, we thought about integrating the sound design in the design research field, because it's quite easy to do that in order to define the discipline itself. So starting, for instance, from a seminal concept given by Nigel Cross or Bruce Hache, saying that design is a discipline, is the third area, is a coherent discipline of study in its own right, etc. We could transpose that to the sound design discipline, and moreover, we could also stand on a very interesting formal approach given by Nigel Cross in his 2006 book, saying that there are some research loci for developing design knowledge. These loci are people, process, and product. I quote Cross, of course. And again, transporting that to sound design could lead us to address this basic following question. Who is making sound design? So investigating the sound designers themselves in a sort of sociological or sociological approach. How sound design is made. So the issue here is to address the method, the protocol, the practices, the tools that is used in sound design, and what sound design produces, meaning that we're interested also in the design sound, the production of the sound design itself. What are the status of these sounds? Are they musical composition? Are they just functional sound, etc.? To these three fundamental questions, we can add also a fourth one, which addresses the question of to whom sound design is made, and on the basis of the conception reception scheme developed by Alain Findeli and Stéphane Vial. This fourth question addresses also the critical issue that stands in sound design, but also in design, the issue of evaluation. How can we evaluate the results and the outcomes of sound design process and sound design project? And of course, it links also with the basic research we do in the group about sound perception and sound cognition. So on that basis, I try to develop a sort of conceptual framework of science of sound design, of course, inspired and very inspired by Cross and all the other authors I mentioned. And just to give an example of what we did in that framework, I would like to just focus on one emblematic project we did some years ago in the automotive industry with the Renault manufacturer. We worked on an industrial artifact, which was a demo car, a sort of high-level concept car, an high-tech concept car whose name was Symbiose. And this car was an electric and an autonomous vehicle, and we were missioned to assume the sound design of this prototype. We did that, of course, within the group, but as I said before, in a strong collaboration with a composer, a sound designer, whose name is Andrea Cera, and we're still working with him until this time. This project, the two main issue of this project was first the external sound, because this vehicle was electric, so silent, so needs to have an external sound to signify its presence to the outdoor. But was also the second issue was considering the internal sound, the sound that we can call sonic human-machine interfaces that sonify all the functionalities that are in the cockpit. And in that second case study, the human-machine interface, there is a very specific user experience related to autonomous drive. That is a very unprecedented user experience, because you are in a cockpit at about 100 km/h with your eyes off, your mind off, and you have to be confident in what occurs and what happens in the cockpit. So this user experience address issues about information on the car decision, on the system that decided to go faster or to brake, etc. It has something to see also with the notion of implicit anticipation of the vehicle's behavior, because these are information that are very important for the passengers to anticipate what happens in the cockpit. And of course, in a global view, it has something to see with the notion of reassurance of the passengers, makes them more confident in the processing of the autonomous system and the autonomous condition. So we developed sonic solution for that with the composer Andrea Cera, for instance, with some sequences of the autonomous drive. For instance, when the autonomous drive is available or is locked on, or when there is a very urgent maneuver to operate, when there is a line change, a trajectory change, and when also there are some positive events, like this event that say to the passengers, everything is okay, you can still going on reading your book or looking at your video, etc. So this is a sort of a positive information that everything is processing in the right way. I would like to present this project, because this project is not only a sound design production for us, but it's also what we can call, on behalf of what Alain Findeli wrote in one of his papers, for instance, a project-grounded research, or a sort of a research through design, because for us, this project produces not only solutions we deliver to the client, but also knowledge on our discipline, that is sound design. And that is what I would like to focus on, because this is the way we try to go on in this concept of science of sound design. Briefly said, this project developed knowledge on, for instance, tools, because we were faced at the problem that is very crucial in sound, but also in design, of course, the problem of prototyping. How can we prototype sounds very quickly with a sort of quick and dirty approach, having sketches to just modify them very quickly, and so, etc. This is a very important problem in sound, and we were faced at that, and we try to bring solutions and to bring ad hoc tools for that problem. We also developed knowledge on more conceptual approach, like the notion of intrusiveness, because we were faced in that project, we were faced at a lot of different informations, different sound, sonic, very brief sounds, etc. And we based our approach, our compositional approach, on this low intrusiveness approach, and we try to highlight some factors that influence this low intrusiveness approach and solution. Factors in the spectral domain, for instance, or regarding memory, regarding the duration of the sound, etc. So what I would like to say is that this project was also the opportunity for us to develop empirical tools or empirical knowledge on the sound design itself, on the discipline we are working on within this kind of project. So to end my presentation, I just would like to come back to this notion of science of sound design that we try to operate and we try to implement in our daily research works. And if I quote Nigel Cross again in one of his very seminal paper, the question for us is to know and to ask if there is a designerly way of knowing, thinking, and acting also in sound design, as it is the case in design, of course. Thank you for your attention.
All right, thank you. And so thank you to all three of our speakers for this fascinating range of work that shows such a variety of situations in which sound is crucial to shaping our experience as well as our relationship to the environment. And so to start off the time we have for some more conversation, one of the questions that's come up and been offered in advance of today is along the lines of how it's not that long ago that the human-centered design felt like the main kind of intervention and advance, and that now that is starting to feel that there's beyond the human, where the interdependence of humans with other living things is something that it's really important for design and artists and musicians to be thinking about. And so I wondered if each of you could speak to this question of designing for a non-human or post-human centered world, and the place of sound in kind of changing our perspective around that. And so maybe starting with Maëlys, and then Alex and Nicola can speak to this.
I mean, the fact is we live in a sonic world, and part of the reason why I designed the installations I did the way I did is because as I mentioned, we have mechanical sound waves. That's what they are, and they require a medium to travel through, and that medium is made by plants through the atmosphere. And so you can't have human-centric sound. It like doesn't exist. It's a figment of our imagination that it should be human-centric, because it wouldn't be if it weren't for the fact that we are in this other living organism and interrelated with other beings. Further to that, the plants that produce the biosphere that makes the atmosphere that transmits that sound is also, or transduces it rather, is also home to other creatures that also are soniferous and require sound in order to be able to basically function. So for mating and for alarm calls and all sorts of other extremely important facets of the ability for life to survive often relies on sound. So our first point of call, I think, is to make sure that whilst we want to become ever more creative as we express our own livingness on this planet, we do so in a way that doesn't infringe or impede the ability for other creatures to use sound in order for them to also survive and live. So I think one of the most important things is being aware that, of course, you can make human-centric sound. I mean, that's music, but you can't produce that in the atmosphere to where it infringes on other creatures' right to life and state of nature. So that's where I begin that question, and others have asked it and done all sorts of amazing work on that, starting with the World Forum for Acoustic Ecology back in the 1970s, and now Murray Schafer and everybody like that. So I'm certainly not the first one to say it, but unfortunately we're far from living in a world like that. So we have to be reminded of that's where to start, I think, answering that question.
Yeah, I think it's interesting about the human-centric sound, because that's a lot of the times clients from us, again, they say, oh yeah, we're very human, we need a very human sound, and it needs to be organic or something, you know. So we, from this marketing standpoint, we can easily differentiate between, okay, what's electronic and what's like handmade. Are there real instruments that you can hear somebody play a guitar really, or you can hear the imperfection of somebody playing notes on a piano, and you can hear the fingers and stuff like this. So that's all very atmospheric for us, and that's sometimes what we consider humans, more human-centric to be than maybe electronic music, or something that you cannot relate to being performed by somebody. And also the another aspect is always using a voice or using hand claps, you know, sounds that come from humans, breathing and all that, that can easily be introduced into that as well, from, yeah, as a one aspect from my side.
Mm. What can I add to these answers is that I think that one answer could be also to look at the concept of acoustic niche that have been developed for a long time by Barry Truax, for instance, or Murray Schafer, and sooner by Bernie Krause, for instance. Because this notion is very interesting. It says briefly that every species could have a sort of a singular communication canal to speak together with their the other member of their family. And I think this is a very interesting concept, because it could share the space, the soundscape, and the space where the creatures are evolving and living, without being imperialist, or without being predator in terms of imposing a certain sound, imposing a certain level, imposing a certain nature of sound. So I think that this notion of acoustic niche is a very deep and strong insight in thinking about what could be a good sound design, or what could be a good sound production for a soundscape, or for a sound artifact, or for other kind of objects.
Sarah? No.
Yeah, thank you very much. I see from the audience writing that we have already shifted to using the term life-centered, which I like too much. I like very much, even if I'm also curious in, for example, the work of Nicola on electric vehicles. I know Alexander has worked on it as well. Opens up a scenario in which we also design for non-living artificial intelligences, taking into account how they could populate our sonic environment or react to our sonic environment. So that would be quite interesting. But back to the audience's questions that were sent before today. There is one about the relationship between a sonic experience with the architectural design of an acoustical space, which is also relevant to the next conversation, perhaps, in the series. So who wants to jump in first?
Well, on that point, I've got one example that that is more, I would say, artistic than functional. Or this is the example of a sound installation in a phalanstery in the north of France. You know, a phalanstery is a sort of a social building where workers are living with you know all the members of a plant, etc. It has been built in the middle of the 19th century, if I remember. This place was designed by a composer, Cécile Le Prado. I can share a little bit my screen to. Oops, sorry, I don't have. Check. Yes, this is a short example of what have been made in that place, which is architecturally very, very impressive. Etc., etc. And the idea of this composition was to give a sort of hint of how was the life in that you know, in the 19th century. How was the life in that place? So Cécile collected you know some sound of these, or composed some sounds of this period, and try to put them in her composition, just to make living this place as it has been in this 19th century. So that's a sort of a joint action between architecture and design in a sort of artistic way.
Yeah, absolutely. It's like sound helps bring back to life, bring to life spaces. Yeah. Any comments from Myris and Alexander on this point, relationship with architectural environment?
Well, I mean, we're going to hold a sound concert in France. I live on a particular piece of land where there's a lot of echoes and reverbs, and you know, it's interesting if you iterate a sound in that space, you can learn so much about the shape of it that you can't see because it's covered in trees, and you also can't really understand the depth of the landscape. But when you sing into it or you make a clap or something, you learn about all the interrelationship of the land with itself. So I think it's really interesting when you use sound, particularly in environments, to discover what those environments are, how they resonate, how they speak back. And I'm really interested, because I feel like we're going to make these compositions that use the landscape in the composition, and the audience are going to sit in different places, and we'll reiterate the same composition the following day, and audience members will sit in a different space. So it'll be very interesting to see how people experience compositional music differently, that has elements that are part of where they're sitting as a part of that composition, which is also part of the landscape that is changing constantly from one day to the next, due to, you know, the humidity in the ground and how many leaves are on the trees and what birds and other animals are around, and all that stuff. So I think you know, like I was saying before, they're inextricably linked, and there's all sorts of things to discover using sound as a mechanical wave again. Yeah.
Absolutely, I totally agree with Marlies, what she's saying, because I think you can experience sound in so many different ways, and it depends on the situation that you're in. So you can never look at a certain sound by itself. It's always, where is it played and with what intention? I mean, if you have people sitting in a room being silent somewhere in a corner for an hour and just experiencing the atmosphere, then that's a different situation than if you're walking around somewhere, you're busy, or maybe you're thinking about different things. But you can also change the whole perception, because we are so much steered by our five senses. That means if you place somebody like in a, I don't know, have a wooden stool sitting there for an hour listening to it, or do you have like a comfortable chair, you know, you can really lean back, or maybe even lie down and listen to it, and it'll be a completely different experience. The temperature in the room may be very, very important. If there's a certain scent in the air, and all that influences it so much. So if you change that, the same identical sound piece will be perceived differently. So yeah, so it's a very, very interesting topic on how we go about that. And we built a new office here in Berlin a bit over a year ago, and just because we're talking about space, it was just like this big warehouse thing in the beginning, was empty, and had this terrible acoustics, because you couldn't talk to each other because of different people were talking. It was like this cacophony, and it was hard to hear anybody. So obviously you have to spend loads and loads of money to get the acoustics of a room right, to make it comfortable for people to be there, to feel well. Mm-hmm.
Yeah, absolutely. I'm a bit wary of the time, and I will ask Deirdre if she has any other comment, but I think we made it clear perhaps a couple of things. One, that sound is per se an interdisciplinary field, whether it's with music or, as we mentioned, with environments, with other creatures, with living or non-living entities. And in that is really part of design. And the second is perhaps is about time, as Nicola was saying, that design, sound design finds its place on the map of design, even if it's not even included in Buchanan's areas of design traditionally. But I think it's about time that it gets its spot on that map. So Deirdre, you want to add anything?
No, just thank you again to all of our panelists today for sharing your work and your thoughts together in this space with us. So thank you.
And I know Paolo wants to add some final remarks. I also wanted to thank you, the audience that has been popping comments and engaging in a conversation. Many names are familiar to me, so thank you for joining. I wanted to add you to the conversation, but that would be for another event, I hope. Paolo, please.
Thank you very much. Thank you, Sarah. Thank you, Deirdre, for assembling this wonderful, incredibly helpful panel. And thank you to all the speakers. Was incredibly interesting, you know, to move from sound design applied to branding, and then to talk about the relationship with the environment and climate change, all those big issues, and then thinking about it as part of design as a science. So that's what we expect from a conversation, to have all these different perspectives, and it's usually just the beginning. That's a promise. So we use really these conversations to create a network of interest, to create connections, and to actually start is a conversation as a starting point. So I see other questions. I see that there is a lot that we have to work on, and hopefully together. So again, this is just the beginning. So we have another conversation to close the fall series. In next month actually will be the beginning of December, because of overlapping with some of the festivities here in the United States. So December the 3rd, we will have another conversation moderated by Ang Lee from the Department of Architecture, thinking about broadly the relationship between design and architecture. And this will be the end of the full series, and we will restart next year with another, probably with a similar format with some changes. And just to conclude, I wanted to remind you also this effort that we started a year ago with Sarah to collect as much as possible what is happening around in terms of data sonification, but sonification more in general. So please help us to keep this archive growing. Is something that we build really as a resource for people that wants to learn more about that. And yeah, that's all. Thank you again. And really, I think this will be the beginning also of a stronger relationship between the departments of music and design within Northeastern, but hopefully also the starting point of a network of alliances on this topic. Thank you very much again, and have a good night, evening, afternoon, depending on where you are. Thank you again on behalf of everyone here.
Thank you.
Thank
Bye-bye.
you. Bye.
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 Thank
Thank
you.
you.
Bye.
Bye. Bye.